Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for the Traitors US Season 2 following Week 6, also known as Episode 8. And this was obviously a more eventful episode where we had a pretty standard round, and obviously we had a pretty big twist at the end, though we'll get to that more in a moment. But there are 12 people to talk about, and let's not waste no more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 12, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Bergie. And obviously Bergie was murdered here as a way of weakening Peter's alliance. And obviously Bergie was someone who I was relatively high on at the beginning of the season. I feel like he was getting relatively strong content, though I will also admit that as the season went on, I did start to back off of him, largely due to his association with Peter's alliance, and with that alliance kind of being presented as more villainous. I feel like that rubbed off pretty poorly on Bergie's end, to where I did start to back off of him, and obviously we see that here where he is murdered due to his connection with that alliance. And in general, I do feel like Bergie played an interesting game here, where obviously he was working alongside Peter for a lot of it. Obviously he was involved in the trap that eventually got Dan caught after Dan tried to murder him in a week where he had a shield. So obviously there are some things to prop up with Bergie's game, but obviously he is now out of the game, so he is here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Parvati. And obviously Parvati is now the second traitor to be taken out in a row during these banishments. And obviously Parvati is someone who I feel like had been set up for a downfall for a lot of the season, particularly with people like Peter going after her and people like Sandra wanting to settle a score with her. And even in this episode, while there was setup to Peter wanting to work with her and her trying to throw Fedra under the bus, I feel like considering just how long Parvati's name has been out there, it just seemed like a matter of time before she would be taken out. It was pretty much a guarantee that a traitor was going to be banished at this latest vote. And obviously at that point where John was calling her out during the roundtable, it seemed pretty clear that she was going out here. So in a lot of ways, I feel like Parvati going out isn't too shocking. And obviously she was one of the bigger names on the season, someone who I was pretty excited to see. And obviously I'm glad that she got to be a traitor here. But obviously she is now out of the game, so she is here at number 11. And with that, there are 10 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based off their edit and current game position. But number 10, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is still Kevin. And obviously Kevin is someone who I never really felt that great about based on the way that he was presented on the show. Where even in this episode, while we do start to see him turn on Peter by the end of it, a lot of it seems to come off as him like being suspicious that Peter was not targeting Parvati in this round, even though Peter was making it clear that he was doing this just as a one-off, knowing that Parvati was such a big threat that it was better to go for Fedra, someone who is a bit more under the radar. So obviously Kevin is someone who doesn't really get that, and he just seems to kind of suspect Peter, even though Peter's someone he's worked with for a lot of the season. And really with his attachment to that alliance, while his distancing from that alliance could be seen as a positive, I feel like it's just a little too late for him to be saved, so he is here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, we have someone who I am also kind of out on at this point, and here we have MJ. And again, MJ is not part of the alliance, but I still feel like she is one of the less important people on the show. Now, to her credit, she is one of the people who was the most gung-ho about targeting Parvati coming to this round, to where it was pretty unlikely she was going to vote out Fedra here. And obviously she does get her way, but I still feel like she's one of the less focused on people in the show. I feel like she hasn't really been propped up as much ever since Dan went out, which is why I have her here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, we have someone who has obviously been a massive character on the show, and here we have Peter. And like I said, I feel like Peter's been set up for a downfall for a while now, and I feel like we are starting to see more of that being taking place, where obviously Parvati does go out here, someone who he has been suspecting for a while, but at the same time, he doesn't even get his way where he wanted to target Fedra first before coming for Parvati. And obviously he went so far as to try to work with Parvati to try to get Fedra out, but is obviously unsuccessful in doing so. And the way that he went about it is now causing sus from even people he was aligned to. People like Kevin, people like MJ are all like worried about him moving forward. And I feel like it's just setting up for him to be taken out sooner rather than later. And even before that, you had him being so far out in front. You have him being clearly being set up as kind of a villain for the season. And I feel like it's just a matter of time before he is eventually taken out, which is a big reason I have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, we have a player who is in a very interesting position right now. And here we have Kate. And obviously, the big thing with Kate is that Phaedra recruited her to be a traitor at the end of the last episode, and she's kind of being forced to accept the offer here as the alternative is just being murdered. So obviously, Kate is probably going to take the offer, especially when we had already had set up to her wanting to be a traitor when she had first entered the game. But even before that, she had some content about like her being sus of Peter, did him like switching his targets from Parvati to Phaedra, and obviously now Kay is going to be a traitor and is going to be a pretty big factor in the game. Now, how she'll do as a traitor, I don't think it's going to go very well. I'll say straight up that at this point in the season, I don't think a traitor is winning the season. I feel like it's going to be a faithful win, and I feel like Kate is not going to do that well as a traitor, considering, well, it's Kate. Now, yes, Phaedra could guide her along a little bit, but at the end of the day, I feel like this is a faithful's game to lose at this point, and I feel like Kate is unlikely to win at this point, considering her content up to this point, but also just the fact that she's not the greatest player in the world. So because of that, I do have her here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, we are going back to a faithful who, again, has not been getting the most content in the world, but I do think they could make it towards the end. And here we have Sheree. And obviously the main thing with Sheree is she does vote for Parvati. That's something. And before that, she did like suspect that was either going to be Bergie or Trelle murdered. But really, this was a pretty quiet episode for her. And again, I feel like she's probably not winning at this point. I feel like a lot of her setup is her just being taken towards the end, if that. But really, I don't really see her winning the game either. I feel like she's probably one of the more underdeveloped people on the show at this point, but I feel like she's at least a bit more likely to get towards the end compared to the other people we talked about, which is why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, we actually have the other traitor left in the game, and here we have Phaedra. And obviously Phaedra survived this campaign from Parvati and Peter to try to get her out, and obviously she is the only original traitor left in the game, but got to recruit Kate by the end of it. And while she doesn't really explain this episode why she picked Kate, I feel like it's largely due to her like being obviously closely aligned with Kate due to them being housewives. And obviously that's going to be a big factor in the game moving forward. But again, kind of like Kate, I already kind of written off the traitors at this point. I feel like even though she did survive this round, she already has like a target on her back. And if people like Trelle want to go for her down the road, I just feel like it's going to eventually culminate in Phaedra being taken out towards the end to where a faithful will win. So obviously with me being kind of out on the traitors based off their edits at this point, and with Phaedra already having this target on her back from people who I feel like are stronger contenders than her based off of their edits, I do have to leave her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, we actually have someone who has gone up a bit since the last time I talked about them, and here we have John Burkow. And obviously this was a bigger episode for John in the sense that Parvati was recruiting him, trying to get him on her side, and she obviously seemed at first to be a bit effective, like where she got emotional and she like was talking about how she would be an actress, only for John to later come out in the roundtable to come out against Parvati and that the campaign wasn't as effective. And I feel like a big thing holding up John this high in the power ranking is that he's kind of being presented as like the faithful of the faithfuls, which obviously did get a bit of setup earlier in the season where people did talk about trusting him and that there's absolutely zero sus on him in terms of actually being a traitor. And obviously he's had some of these over the top speeches and big moments during the roundtables in which a traitor got taken out, where obviously he had his speech when voting for Dan when Dan got taken out. And now he had a bigger moment during the moment where Parvati got taken out. So I feel like there's this aspect of John being seen as like the leader of the faithfuls and sort of the embodiment of the faithful movement that kind of is elevating him a bit as a character on the show. And I feel like that's kind of leaving him a bit higher in this power ranking than I gave him a bit of credit for earlier in the season. So I feel like that's a big reason why I have John higher this week, even though I was a bit lower on him earlier on. Though realistically, considering the top 3, I feel like he's probably not being as set up to win the game by the end of it, which is why I do have him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and I feel like this person may be a bit too high, though I feel like this was obviously a notable episode for them, and here we have Sandra, who at this point is like the last of these big Survivor and Big Brother people to be left in the game. And obviously she won the battle against Parvati. She's able to get her out. And obviously she had her little moment talking about how she's going to be the queen of the castle now. And obviously that's a big moment for her. It's just a question of where she goes next. As I feel like a lot of her content during the season was her wanting to take out Parvati and for her to settle this score between them. And obviously now that she's gotten through that, it's just a question of where she's going next. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure where she's going at this point. I could see her like continuing to want to take out the traitors down the road. I could see her being targeted in turn. So like, admittedly, I feel like she could be a little too high on this list. as I'm not entirely sure where her edit is going at this point in the season, but it is the fact that she has won this battle against Parvati, and the fact that she is probably one of the more notable characters on the season that leaves her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, we actually have the same top 2 as last week, and it is actually the same order. By number 2, we do have Trelle. And in some ways, you could say that this was a bad episode for Trelle, as she doesn't get her way. She is one of the people gunning for Fedra. She has talked about wanting to get out Fedra for a bit, and while she was able to get Peter to sign on to the plan, she wasn't able to convince the other people of her alliance to get through with it. And obviously that's kind of bad on that end. But at the same time, considering that I feel like Fedra has been kind of undercut at this point in the edit, I could see a world where this Trelle and Fedra battle could be set up for the end game, where obviously Trelle is eventually the one to take out Fedra towards the end and obviously get a win that way. And even beyond that, you have the fact that Fedra has not caught on to the fact that Trelle is onto her, where Fedra had a clear opportunity to take out Trelle during the murder, and while that she was one of the options on the board, she did go for Bergie instead. And we haven't really seen Fedra talking about the fact that Trelle is onto her, and I feel like it may be a big blind spot within her game to where I could see Trelle kind of catching up to Fedra by the end of it. So I feel like that is another pro keeping Trelle this high on the list, and obviously the fact that she got through this round, that this was one of the more perilous rounds for her, and I feel like with Peter being a bigger target compared to Trelle, I feel like that's probably a pro there. But at the end of the day, I feel like the top person is probably a bit more set up to win, and I feel like they're probably not as focused on Fedra compared to Trelle, which is why she's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win the Traitors US Season 2 at this point is still CT. And I feel like this episode only made me more confident that CT will come out by the end of it. We're kind of similar to Trelle. I feel like CT is clearly being set up as a major character at this point in the season, but I think a big thing separating the two is that I feel like CT has been framed as the more strategic of the two and the one more focused on the game, where we literally saw during the roundtable in this episode that he was contemplating whether to vote for Parvati or for Fedra. And it did seem like at first that he was going to make a mistake in voting for Parvati, kind of leading into the fact that Fedra had saved him. But obviously he talks about how he's looking for traitors and not for love. And yes, while him saving Fedra could be seen as him choosing love, he still managed to get out a traitor, so I feel like that's probably not as big of a negative. And I just feel like compared to him and Trelle, I feel like those two are pretty set up to get towards the end. I feel like with the undercutting of the other traitors, I feel like a Faithful is clearly being set to win at this point. And I feel like CT has been getting enough like unnecessary content like that kind of leaves him as this major character, but also not someone who's overexposed. And I feel like CT has been framed as a savvy game player, someone who is like shown like making these decisions based on his game, that I feel like the show is kind of propping him up as someone who is playing strategically, and that they're not as focused on the personal side that we have seen with Trelle, like when Trelle got mad at him for not saving her at the safety chain. So I think those things were enough to separate CT from Trelle from me. I feel like this episode only continued to bolster CT's winning chances in my eyes, and because of that, he is here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I am covering other shows such as Australian Survivor and Survivor 46, which is coming up relatively soon, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.